The woman shouldn't have been there. No one stayed at abandoned stations after dark, not unless they had nowhere else to go or something to hide. Deke Carver found her sitting on a wooden bench, straight-backed, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a train that would never come. She looked up when his boots hit the platform. Her eyes caught the moonlight, and she spoke before he could turn away. "If you stay tonight, I'll tell you the truth." He stopped, not because he believed her, but because of what sat beside her on that bench. A child's shoe. Just one. And it was covered in dried mud that looked too dark to be dirt. The words hung in the cold air between them. Deke had been walking for 3 days straight, his legs aching, his throat raw from dust. He'd seen the station from the ridge above, a skeletal structure against the darkening sky. The rails had been pulled up years ago, leaving only wooden ties half buried in sand. No one came here anymore. The nearest town was a day's ride east, and he'd left that behind for reasons he didn't care to examine. He needed rest. He needed water. He needed to not think about the last town, the last mistake, the last time someone had looked at him with trust he didn't deserve. But now this woman sat before him, speaking words that made no sense, and beside her was that shoe. Small, child-sized, the leather cracked and stained. "Who are you?" His voice came out rougher than intended. She didn't flinch. Her face remained calm, almost serene, but her hands gripped each other tighter. "My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is whether you'll stay." He looked past her into the station house. The door hung open, darkness pooling inside. A lantern burned on a hook near the entrance, its flame steady despite the wind. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. Who had lit it? How long had she been here? Where did the oil come from? "You're alone out here." It wasn't a question. She nodded slowly. "I am now." Now. The word carried weight he couldn't identify. Deke's hand moved instinctively toward the knife at his belt, not to threaten but to remind himself it was there. He'd learned not to trust people who appeared where they shouldn't be, saying things that sounded like riddles. The frontier was full of desperate souls, and desperation made people dangerous in ways violence never could. The woman stood, and he noticed how her dress, once fine fabric, now hung loose and worn. She'd been beautiful once, maybe still was beneath the exhaustion carved into her features. But it was her eyes that held him. They weren't pleading or threatening. They were empty of everything except a terrible patience, like she'd been waiting not for hours but for something inevitable to finally arrive. "You look like someone running from something." She tilted her head slightly. "So am I. The difference is I stopped running. That's why I'm here. That's why you're here too, even if you don't know it yet." He should have left. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, walk back into the night, find somewhere else to rest. But the shoe caught his eye again, and this time he noticed something else. Behind the bench, barely visible in the shadows, was a small bundle wrapped in cloth, and next to it, scratched into the wooden platform, were marks. Dozens of them, like someone had been counting days, or waiting for something, or keeping track of something that should never be counted. The woman followed his gaze and smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I told you, if you stay tonight, I'll tell you the truth. But I need you to stay. All night, until the sun rises. Because the truth isn't something you can hear in pieces. It has to be told when the world is dark enough to believe it." "What truth?" His throat felt dry. She picked up the shoe, held it carefully, almost reverently. "The truth about what happened here. The truth about why I can't leave. And the truth about what you did, Deke Carver, even though you don't remember my face." His blood went cold. She knew his name. How? He'd never seen her before. He was certain of it. But the way she looked at him, with that terrible knowing patience, made him question everything. Who was she? What did she know? And why did that shoe feel like an accusation he couldn't defend against? He opened his mouth to demand answers, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Not yet. First, you have to decide. Stay or go. Truth or cowardice." She turned and walked toward the station house, the lantern casting her shadow long and distorted across the platform. "The choice, like always, is yours." Deke stood frozen on the platform, his mind racing through possibilities. He could leave, should leave, but his legs wouldn't move, and something deeper than curiosity kept him rooted there. She knew his name. That changed everything. He watched her disappear into the station house, the lantern light swallowing her silhouette, and realized he'd already made his choice the moment he stopped walking. Coward or fool, he had to know what she meant. What truth could she possibly have about him? He followed her inside, his boots echoing on the worn floorboards. The interior was bare except for a few broken chairs and a ticket counter covered in dust. The woman had set the lantern on the counter, and its glow revealed more details. The walls were scarred with scratches, similar to the marks outside. Someone had spent considerable time here, marking days or maybe something else entirely. She stood with her back to him, her shoulders rigid. When she finally turned, her face looked older in the harsh light. Lines of grief etched deep around her mouth. "You stayed." Her voice was soft, almost surprised. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak yet. She gestured to one of the intact chairs. "Sit. We have hours before dawn, and I need you to understand before I tell you everything." He remained standing. His hand stayed near his knife. She noticed but didn't comment. "Smart man. You don't trust me. You shouldn't. But I'm not going to hurt you, Deke Carver. I'm going to hurt you worse than any blade could. I'm going to make you remember." "Remember what?" The words came out sharper than intended. She moved to a corner where the bundle he'd noticed outside now sat, brought in while he'd been deciding. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a collection of items. A torn piece of fabric, a small wooden toy, a letter, the paper yellowed and creased from repeated folding, and beneath it all, a photograph. She held it up to the light. Deke's breath caught in his throat. The image showed a family, a man, a woman, and a boy, maybe 7 years old. They stood in front of a house, all three smiling at the camera, but it was the man's face that made Deke's stomach drop. He knew that face. Not well, but enough to feel the first stirrings of dread. "That's my brother." Her voice remained steady, controlled. "Thomas Quaid. He worked as a freight manager. Good man. Honest. Had a wife named Sarah and a son named Michael. They lived in a small house near the depot in Copper Ridge. Do you remember Copper Ridge, Deke?" He did. 3 years ago. Maybe 4. Time had a way of blurring when you spent it running. He'd passed through that town, stayed maybe 2 nights, worked a few odd jobs to earn enough for supplies. Nothing memorable. Nothing significant. He'd met dozens of men, shared drinks, played cards, moved on. That's what drifters did. They moved on. "I don't remember your brother." It was the truth, or at least part of it. She nodded as if expecting that answer. "Of course you don't. You met him once. Briefly. At a saloon. He was celebrating because he'd just gotten word about a promotion. He bought drinks for everyone there that night." She paused, her jaw tightening. "You were there. You drank his whiskey. You smiled and congratulated him. And then you left." Deke's mind scrambled through memories, trying to find purchase. Copper Ridge. A saloon. Free drinks. Yes, there had been something like that. A happy man. Generous with his money. Others had been there too. Names he never learned. Faces he never bothered to remember. "So I had a drink with your brother." His tone came out defensive. "That doesn't explain why you're here or why you think I need to hear this." Her eyes hardened. "I'm getting there. Be patient. That night after you left, my brother stayed. He kept drinking, kept celebrating. He was supposed to go home to Sarah and Michael. They were waiting for him. But he stayed 1 hour too long." She picked up the small wooden toy, a carved horse missing one leg. When he finally left the saloon, he was drunk. Too drunk to notice the men following him. Too drunk to defend himself when they cornered him in the alley behind the depot. They took everything. His money, his watch, his life. Deke felt ice spread through his chest. He wanted to say something. Anything. But words failed him. She wasn't finished. They found him the next morning. Sarah identified the body. Michael never spoke again after that day. The boy went silent. Completely silent. Like someone had reached inside him and stolen his voice. She set the toy down carefully. 6 months later, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She walked into the river. They found her dress on the bank. They never found her. Michael was sent to live with me. I tried, Deke Carver. I tried so hard to reach him, to bring him back. But he was already gone. Just a shell walking around, waiting for permission to stop existing. Where is he now? Deke's voice barely rose above a whisper. She looked directly at him, and for the first time he saw tears gathering in her eyes, though none fell. Dead. 2 years ago. He walked out into a snowstorm and never came back. We found his body 3 days later, frozen, still holding that wooden horse his father had carved for him. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. So that's 3 lives. Thomas, Sarah, Michael, all gone because my brother stayed 1 hour too long at a celebration, because he was too drunk to defend himself. Because no one walked him home. Deke's mouth had gone dry. This was grief talking, raw and sharp, looking for somewhere to land. But what did it have to do with him? I'm sorry for your loss, but I didn't kill your brother. I didn't rob him. I just shared a drink. She smiled then, cold and terrible. No, you didn't kill him, but you watched it happen, and you did nothing to stop it. The words hit him like a physical blow. What are you talking about? I wasn't there. I told you. I left before he did. Did you? She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the exhaustion carved into her features. Or did you stand in that alley, hidden in the shadows, and watch while 3 men beat my brother to death? Did you stand there and do nothing because getting involved wasn't worth the risk? Did you walk away while he bled out on the ground, calling for help that never came? No. The denial came automatically, but even as he said it, something shifted in his memory. That night in Copper Ridge, he'd left the saloon, yes, but he'd heard shouting. He'd seen shadows moving in the alley. He'd paused, just for a moment, weighing the risk of interference against the safety of anonymity, and then he'd walked away. He'd told himself it wasn't his business. Men fought in alleys all the time. Getting involved only brought trouble. So he'd walked away, found a place to sleep, and left town the next morning before sunrise. He'd forgotten about it, or convinced himself he had. But now, staring at this woman's face, at the photograph of a smiling family that no longer existed, the memory returned with brutal clarity. The sound of fists hitting flesh, a voice calling out, then silence, and he'd kept walking. How do you know? His voice shook. How could you possibly know I was there? She reached into her pocket and pulled out another item, a piece of paper, folded carefully. When they found Thomas's body, he had this clutched in his hand. It took weeks before the sheriff could get it open without tearing it. She unfolded it slowly, revealing a crude sketch. A man's face, drawn in pencil. The features were rough but recognizable. A scar along the jaw, eyes that looked tired and distant. It could have been anyone, but Deke knew with sinking certainty that it was meant to be him. Thomas drew this before he died. She kept her voice level. His last conscious act was trying to describe the man who watched him die. The man who could have helped, but chose to walk away instead. Deke stared at the sketch, his hands trembling. The face staring back at him was crude but unmistakable. The scar, the tired eyes, the set of his jaw. He wanted to deny it, to call it coincidence or imagination, or the desperate invention of a dying man. But he couldn't, because he remembered now with perfect and terrible clarity that moment in the alley, the pause, the calculation, the decision to keep walking. His throat tightened until breathing hurt. I didn't know. The words sounded pathetic even to his own ears. She folded the sketch carefully, placing it back with the other items. That's what everyone says, isn't it? I didn't know. I didn't mean to. I didn't think it would matter. She moved to the window, looking out at the empty darkness. But it did matter. It mattered to Thomas when he lay dying in that alley. It mattered to Sarah when she couldn't sleep anymore, haunted by questions that had no answers. It mattered to Michael when he stopped believing the world held anything worth speaking about. Why did you bring me here? Deke's voice came out hoarse. Why track me down? Why tell me this now, years later? What do you want from me? She turned back to face him, and something in her expression had shifted. The cold anger was still there, but beneath it lay something more complex. Something closer to exhaustion. Because I needed to know if you'd stay, if you'd listen, if you were capable of facing what you did instead of running from it like you've been running from everything else in your miserable life. He flinched at the accusation, but he didn't argue. She was right. He'd been running for years, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots or face consequences. Always moving, always alone, always convinced that solitude was safety. But it wasn't safety. It was cowardice dressed up as independence. And now, standing in this abandoned station with a woman whose family he'd helped destroy through inaction, he finally understood what he'd been running from. Himself. His choices. The weight of all the moments when he could have been better but chose to be nothing instead. I can't undo it. He met her eyes, forcing himself not to look away. I can't bring them back. I can't change what I did or didn't do. She nodded slowly. No, you can't. So what do you want? Apology? Revenge? What am I supposed to give you that would make any difference? She walked back to the counter, her fingers trailing along the dusty surface. I want you to understand something. When Thomas died, I was angry, furious. I wanted someone to blame, someone to punish. The men who killed him were never caught. They vanished like smoke. But you I could find. It took me 2 years of asking questions, following leads, tracking rumors. I learned that you never stayed anywhere long, that you worked odd jobs and moved on, that you had no friends, no family, no one who would miss you if you disappeared. Deke felt his hand move toward his knife again, but she shook her head. Don't. I'm not going to kill you. I thought about it, planned it, imagined it 1,000 different ways. She laughed, but the sound held no humor. But then I realized something. Killing you would be too easy, too quick. You'd die without understanding what you took from the world, without feeling the weight of it. So I decided on something else, something worse. I decided to make you remember, to make you carry it, to make sure that every day for the rest of your life you'll see their faces. Thomas, Sarah, Michael, you'll know their names, you'll know their story, and you'll never be able to forget that you could have saved them. That simple choice, that one moment of cowardice, cost 3 people everything. Her words landed like stones, each one adding to the crushing weight settling on his chest. This was her revenge. Not violence, but memory. Not death, but the slow torture of living with full knowledge of what he'd done. And it was working. Already he could feel something breaking inside him, some wall he'd built to keep guilt at bay. He thought of all the times he'd walked away from trouble, convinced himself it wasn't his problem, that getting involved only brought pain. How many other people had suffered because of his careful distance? How many other families had been destroyed while he preserved his own safety? There's more. Her voice cut through his thoughts. That's not the only reason I brought you here. He looked up, surprised. She gestured to the scratches on the walls, the marks he'd noticed earlier. I've been coming to this station for 8 months, ever since I finally tracked you to the territory. I learned your patterns, your routes, the places you frequented. I knew eventually you'd pass through here. This station sits at the crossroads of 3 territories. Everyone passes through eventually, even drifters who think they're beyond finding. So I waited, marked each day. 53 times I came here, hoping this would be the night you'd arrive. Why here? Why not just confront me in town? In daylight? She smiled grimly. Because I needed you alone. No witnesses, no escape. And because this place means something. It's where the last train stopped before reaching Copper Ridge. Thomas used to work here before he got transferred. He loved trains, loved the sound of them, the promise of them. Used to bring Michael here to watch them arrive and depart. This was a happy place once. She looked around the ruined interior. Now it's a graveyard. Fitting, don't you think? Deke swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I want you to stay until dawn. I want you to listen to everything I have to say about them. Every detail, every memory. I want you to know who they were, what they loved, what they dreamed about. And then, when the sun rises, I want you to walk away carrying that knowledge. I want it to follow you everywhere. I want you to never have another peaceful night's sleep. I want you to feel what I feel every single day. The absence, the guilt, the endless crushing weight of knowing you could have done something but didn't. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to find some way to lessen the burden she was placing on his shoulders. But he couldn't, because she was right. He deserved this. He deserved worse. So he nodded slowly, accepting the punishment she'd designed for him. I'll stay. I'll listen. I'll remember. She exhaled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Good, because there's something else you need to know. Something I haven't told you yet. He waited, sensing another blow coming. She reached into her pocket and pulled out one more item. A letter, sealed with wax, the paper fresh and new unlike the other yellowed documents. This came 3 days ago, from the sheriff in Copper Ridge. He finally caught them, the men who killed Thomas. All 3 of them. They were arrested trying to rob another traveler. They confessed to everything, including Thomas. Relief flooded through Deke, followed immediately by confusion. Then why am I here? Why track me down if they caught the real killers? She broke the seal on the letter, unfolding it slowly. Because they said something during their confession. Something that changed everything. One of them, the leader, said they only went after Thomas because they'd heard someone talking in the saloon earlier. Someone who mentioned that Thomas was carrying a month's wages and his gold watch. Someone who described exactly where Thomas would be walking and when he'd be leaving. They said they'd overheard two men talking. One of them matched your description. The other, they couldn't identify. Deke's blood turned to ice. No, I never said anything like that. I didn't know he had money. I wouldn't have cared. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. I know. I believe you. Because I did my research. I talked to everyone who was in that saloon that night, and I found the man who was talking. She paused. It wasn't you, but you were standing close enough to hear, close enough to know what was being planned, close enough to warn Thomas. And once again, you chose silence. Once again, you walked away. The room seemed to tilt. Deke gripped the back of a chair to steady himself, his knuckles white against the wood. Memory crashed over him in waves, each one more damning than the last. The saloon. Two men at the bar. Voices low but not low enough. One of them describing a freight manager who'd just gotten paid. Easy target, the man had said. Walks home alone. Drinks too much. Won't see it coming. And Deke had heard every word. He'd stood there, drink in hand, weighing the risks of getting involved. Stranger's business, he'd told himself. Not your problem. So he'd finished his whiskey and left. And within hours, Thomas Quaid was dead in an alley. You remember, it wasn't a question. Ivy watched his face, reading the truth there like words on a page. He couldn't deny it anymore. Yes. The admission felt like swallowing broken glass. I heard them. I knew something was going to happen. She nodded, her expression unchanging. The bartender remembered you. Said you looked nervous after those men started talking. Said you left quickly, like you wanted distance from whatever was coming. He also said you looked back once through the window before disappearing down the street, like you were considering doing something. But you didn't. Deke sank into the chair, his legs no longer willing to support him. This was worse than he'd imagined, worse than simple cowardice. He'd had specific knowledge of a planned crime and chosen silence. That made him complicit. That made him almost as guilty as the men who'd actually swung the fists and stolen the life. Why are you telling me this now? His voice came out hollow. Why not just turn me over to the law? Let them decide what I deserve? She laughed, sharp and bitter. Because the law doesn't care about what you didn't do. They care about what you did. And technically you didn't break any laws. You didn't rob anyone. You didn't assault anyone. You just stood by and let evil happen. That's not illegal. It's just monstrous. The word hit him like a slap. Monstrous. Was that what he was? He'd never thought of himself that way. He'd always believed he was simply practical, self-preserving, smart enough to avoid trouble. But now, seeing himself through her eyes, through the lens of 3 destroyed lives, he understood the truth. He was a coward, a moral failure, someone so consumed with his own safety that he'd let innocent people suffer rather than risk himself. How did you find me? He needed to change the subject, to find some ground that didn't feel like quicksand beneath his feet. How did you track me across 3 territories? She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, worn leather with pages filled with cramped handwriting. I became someone else, someone who could do what needed to be done. I learned to ask the right questions, to follow trails most people wouldn't notice. Every odd job you took, every town you passed through, every person you spoke to, they remembered something. A man with a scar, a drifter who never stayed long, a worker who kept to himself. She flipped through the pages. It took time. Money I didn't have, but I was patient. And eventually all those fragments came together. They led me here. Deke looked at the notebook, seeing months or maybe years of obsessive research condensed into those pages. This wasn't just grief. This was something darker, more consuming. She'd sacrificed everything to find him, to bring him to this moment. What happened to your life, your work, your home? She shrugged, the gesture conveying a terrible indifference. What life? After Michael died, there was nothing left. No family, no reason to stay in one place or care about anything beyond this. Finding you became the only thing that mattered, the only purpose I had left. She met his eyes. So I gave everything else up, sold the house, quit my job, became what I needed to become, a hunter. The word sent ice through his veins. That's what he'd become to her. Prey. Something to be tracked and cornered and made to face consequences. He thought about running, but where would he go? She'd already proven she could follow him anywhere. And more than that, he didn't want to run anymore. Because she was right. He deserved this. He deserved to sit in this abandoned station and face what he'd done. "What's the rest of it?" he forced himself to ask. "You said you'd tell me everything about them. Their lives. Their dreams. So tell me. Make me understand what I took from the world." She studied him for a long moment, as if measuring his sincerity. Then she picked up the photograph again, holding it so the lantern light illuminated the faces. Thomas loved trains more than anything except his family. Used to say they represented possibility. Every train that came through carried people toward new lives, new chances. He wanted that for Michael. Wanted him to believe the world was bigger than one small town. She traced her finger over the boy's face in the photograph. Michael was brilliant. Could do mathematics in his head faster than most adults could with pencil and paper. Thomas was saving money to send him to a real school, somewhere he could develop that gift. Sarah made clothes, beautiful dresses that women would travel from other towns to buy. She had steady hands and an eye for detail. Thomas used to joke that she could make anything look elegant, even him. They were happy, genuinely happy. The kind of happiness that's rare and precious and should have been protected. Her voice cracked slightly. And it could have been, if one person had spoken up, if one person had valued their lives more than his own comfort. If you had been brave for just 5 minutes, they'd all still be alive. The accusation hung in the air between them, undeniable and devastating. Deke felt something break inside him, some last defense crumbling under the weight of her words. "You're right." His voice came out barely above a whisper. "You're absolutely right. I was a coward. I am a coward. And I'll carry this for the rest of my life. But what do you want from me now? What will actually satisfy you?" She set the photograph down carefully, her hands shaking slightly. "I want you to feel it, really feel it, not just acknowledge it or apologize for it. I want it to consume you the way it's consumed me. I want you to wake up every morning knowing you're responsible for destroying a family. I want you to go to sleep every night seeing their faces. I want you to understand that your silence killed them just as surely as those men's fists did." He nodded slowly, accepting the sentence. "I understand." She shook her head. "No, not yet. But you will. Because there's more I haven't told you. More you need to know before dawn comes." He looked up, surprised. What else could there possibly be? She reached for the bundle again, pulling out one final item he hadn't noticed before. A letter, addressed in a child's careful handwriting. "To whoever finds this." His stomach dropped. Michael wrote this a week before he died. It was in his pocket when they found his body. She held it out to him. "Read it. Understand what your cowardice cost. Not just lives, but futures. Dreams. Every good thing that could have been but now never will be." He took the letter with trembling hands, the paper feeling impossibly heavy. As he unfolded it, he knew with absolute certainty that whatever words waited inside would change him forever, that there would be a before reading this letter and an after, and the after would be unbearable. But he'd chosen to stay, chosen to listen, chosen to face what he'd done. So he read. The handwriting was careful, each letter formed with the precision of a child who'd been taught well and took pride in doing things correctly. "To whoever finds this. My name is Michael Quaid. I am 11 years old and I don't want to be alive anymore. I know that's wrong to say. Aunt Ivy tells me every day that things will get better, that time heals, that I'll learn to live with what happened. But she's wrong. Time doesn't heal. It just makes everything further away, like watching the world through thick glass. I can see people moving and talking, but I can't hear them anymore. I can't feel anything except this heavy thing in my chest that gets heavier every day." Deke's hands shook as he continued reading. "I dream about my father every night. Sometimes they're good dreams where he's still alive, and we're watching trains together. He'd tell me about where they were going, make up stories about the passengers. He said someday we'd ride one together, go somewhere new, somewhere I could learn things he couldn't teach me. But then I wake up and remember he's gone. That he died in an alley while people walked by and did nothing. The sheriff said someone might have seen it happening but didn't help. I think about that person a lot. I wonder what kind of person can watch someone die and just walk away. I wonder if they have nightmares too, or if they sleep fine because they tell themselves it wasn't their problem." The words cut deeper than any blade could. Deke forced himself to keep reading, though every instinct screamed at him to stop. "My mother tried so hard after father died. She'd wake up every morning and make breakfast and smile at me like everything was normal, but I could see it in her eyes. She was already gone, just waiting for permission to leave. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that she could go, that I understood, but I couldn't make the words come out. My voice stopped working the day they told me about Father. It's like something broke inside my throat and I can't fix it no matter how hard I try. The doctor said it's shock that it might come back, but I don't want it back. What would I say anyway? That I miss him? That I'm angry? That I don't understand why bad things happen to good people? Deke's vision blurred. He blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall, though his chest felt like it was being crushed. When Mother walked into the river, Aunt Ivy cried for days. She thought I didn't notice because she tried to hide it, but I heard her at night sobbing in her room. She took me in even though she barely had enough for herself. She gave up everything to take care of me, and I repay her by being this broken thing that can't speak or smile or feel anything except empty. I know I'm hurting her. I know she deserves better than having to watch me fade away little by little. That's why I've decided to stop. Not because I'm brave, but because I'm tired. So tired of carrying this weight. So tired of pretending tomorrow might be different. The letter continued. If whoever finds this wants to know why I did it, tell them it's because I couldn't stop thinking about that person who watched my father die. That person who could have helped but didn't. That person who decided their safety was more important than someone else's life. I wonder if they know what they did, if they think about it at all, or if they just moved on with their life like nothing happened. I hope they don't sleep well. I hope they remember. I hope it hurts them the way it hurts me, because if it doesn't, then nothing means anything. If people can destroy families and feel nothing, then what's the point of any of this? The letter ended abruptly, the last lines trailing off as if Michael had lost the strength or will to continue. Deke set the letter down carefully, his hands numb. The room felt too small, the air too thin. He couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think. The weight of those words, written by a child who'd given up on living because of choices Deke had made, was more than he could process. This wasn't just about Thomas anymore. It was about the cascade of destruction that followed, about how one act of cowardice had rippled outward, claiming life after life, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. I can't. His voice broke. I can't carry this. It's too much. Ivy's expression remained cold. You'll carry it because you have to. Because Michael carried it until it killed him. Because Sarah carried it until she couldn't anymore. Because Thomas carried it alone in that alley, bleeding out while hoping someone would help. You don't get to choose whether this is too much. You lost that right the night you walked away. He wanted to argue, to find some way to defend himself, but there was nothing left to say. She was right about everything. He was exactly what Michael had described in that letter. A person who valued safety over humanity. Someone who'd destroyed a family through inaction and moved on without consequence. Until now. Until this woman had tracked him down and forced him to face it. What do you want me to do? The question came out desperate, pleading. Tell me what I can do to make this right. She laughed, harsh and broken. Make it right? You think there's something you can do that would balance this? Some action that would resurrect 3 people and undo years of suffering? There's nothing, Deke Carver. Nothing you can do will ever make this right. That's the point. That's what you have to live with. The complete and total impossibility of redemption. The words landed like hammer blows. No redemption. No path forward except carrying this burden forever. He thought about his own life, the years of drifting, the careful distance he'd maintained from everyone and everything. He'd thought he was protecting himself, staying free, avoiding the pain that came with attachment. But really, he'd been running from this moment, running from the inevitable reckoning with who he really was. A coward, a moral failure, someone whose existence had made the world actively worse. Can I ask you something? His voice came out hoarse. She nodded. Why did you really bring me here? To this specific place? You said it was where Thomas worked, where he brought Michael. But there's more, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. Her expression shifted, a flicker of something uncertain crossing her features. You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for. Yes, there's more. She moved to the window, looking out at the darkness. This station isn't just where Thomas worked. It's where I last saw him alive. Deke's breath caught. What? She turned back to face him, and for the first time he saw genuine pain break through her controlled exterior. I was here that night, the night he died. I'd come to visit. to see how he was settling into the new position. We had dinner at the house with Sarah and Michael, and then Thomas insisted on showing me the station, his pride and joy. We walked here together, talked about his dreams for the future, about Michael's education, about how good life was finally becoming. She paused, her voice thickening, and then he said he needed to go back to town for something, some celebration at the saloon. I told him not to go, told him to stay home with his family, but he insisted, said it was important, that his new colleagues were expecting him. So I let him go. I stood right here on this platform and watched him walk away into the dark. She touched the window frame, her fingers tracing patterns in the dust. That was the last time I saw my brother alive, and every day since I've wondered what would have happened if I'd been more insistent, if I'd walked with him, if I'd done anything differently. Her eyes met his, fierce and bright with unshed tears. So you see, Deke Carver, you're not the only one who failed him that night. The difference is I've been punishing myself ever since. Now it's your turn. The confession hung between them like smoke. Deke stared at Ivy, seeing her differently now. Not just as his accuser, but as someone equally trapped by that night, equally destroyed by choices made and not made. You blame yourself. It wasn't a question. She turned away from the window, her composure cracking. Every single day, I replay that conversation in my mind. I hear myself telling him not to go. I see him smiling, brushing off my concerns, and I let him. I didn't insist. I didn't follow. I just stood here and watched him disappear into the darkness. She wrapped her arms around herself. So yes, I blame myself, but at least I tried to stop him. At least I said something. You heard men planning to hurt him and said nothing. That's the difference between us. Deke wanted to argue that her guilt absolved his own, but he knew it didn't work that way. Two people failing someone didn't make either failure less severe. It just meant Thomas Quaid had been failed by more people than he deserved. Is that why you've been coming here? To punish yourself as much as to punish me? She nodded slowly. This station is my penance. Every time I walk through that door, I remember standing on this platform watching him leave. Every mark on those walls represents another day I've survived when my brother didn't, when Sarah didn't, when Michael didn't. She picked up the small wooden horse, the toy Thomas had carved for his son. I keep thinking if I come here enough times, suffer enough, carry enough weight, maybe it'll balance out somehow. Maybe I'll have paid my debt, but it doesn't work that way, does it? Deke's voice was quiet. The debt never gets paid. The weight never gets lighter. She met his eyes, and in that moment they understood each other completely. Two people drowning in guilt, searching for absolution that would never come. No. It doesn't. The weight just becomes who you are. You learn to walk bent under it. You learn to breathe with a chest full of stones. And you keep going, because the alternative is giving up like Michael did. And that would be the final insult to everyone who died. They walked toward the counter, both of them exhausted, both carrying burdens too heavy for one person, but somehow shared now in this abandoned place. Deke noticed details he'd missed before. Scratches on the floor forming patterns. Dried candle wax where she'd kept vigil. This wasn't just where Ivy came to confront him. This was where she came to remember, to grieve, to keep her brother alive in the only way she knew how. How long were you planning to wait here? Days? Weeks? As long as it took. Her answer was simple. Absolute. I had nothing else. No one waiting for me. No place I needed to be. Just this. Just waiting for you to arrive so I could finally tell someone the truth about what happened. So I wouldn't be the only one carrying it anymore. He understood that impulse. The desperate need to share pain so it wouldn't crush you alone. But sharing it with him, making him complicit in her grief, that was both generous and cruel. Now they were both trapped in this story. Both responsible for keeping the memory of Thomas, Sarah, and Michael alive. What happens when the sun comes up? His question broke the heavy silence. Do we just walk away? Pretend this conversation never happened? Return to our separate lives? She shook her head. I don't know. I planned everything up to this moment, but never beyond it. I imagined confronting you, telling you everything, making you understand. But I never thought about what comes after. Maybe there is no after. Maybe this is just where we stay. The idea should have terrified him, but instead it felt almost peaceful, staying in this liminal space where past and present collided, where guilt could be examined and shared rather than buried and denied. But he knew they couldn't actually stay. Dawn would come regardless of their wishes, and with it the requirement to move forward somehow. I need to tell you something. Deke's voice was rough. About that night, about why I walked away. She waited, her expression guarded. When I heard those men planning, I didn't just think about the risk to myself. I thought about all the other times I'd gotten involved, tried to help, tried to do the right thing. And every single time, it had ended badly. People I'd tried to help ended up worse off. Situations I'd tried to fix became more complicated. So I'd learned to stay out of things, to keep my distance, to let people sort their own problems. He paused, knowing how inadequate this sounded. I'm not saying it was right. I'm saying it was a pattern. A survival strategy that had kept me alive, but had also turned me into someone who could hear a man's death being planned and do nothing. That doesn't make it better. Her voice was flat. If anything, it makes it worse. You had a history of trying to help and failing, so you stopped trying altogether. You chose your own comfort over the possibility of failure. He nodded. Yes, that's exactly what I did. And I can't undo it. I can't go back and warn Thomas. I can't save Sarah from the river or Michael from the snow. All I can do is stand here and admit that I'm the kind of person who fails when it matters most. The kind of person who convinces himself that doing nothing is the same as doing no harm. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Do you know what the worst part is? Not that you walked away. Not even that 3 people died because of it. The worst part is how many other Deke Carvers there are in the world. How many people stand by and watch and do nothing because it's easier, safer, more convenient. You're not unique in your cowardice. You're just the one I found. The one I could force to face it. Her words struck deep because they were true. He wasn't unique. He was simply one of countless people who chose comfort over courage, safety over sacrifice. The world was full of witnesses who did nothing, bystanders who walked away, people who convinced themselves that someone else would handle it. And because of that collective cowardice, people like Thomas Quaid died in alleys while the world kept spinning. Can I ask you something? Deke met her eyes. What? If you could go back, if you had that night again, would you insist harder? Would you stop Thomas from leaving? She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. I want to say yes. I want to believe I'd be stronger, more forceful, that I'd refuse to let him go. But honestly, I don't know. Because in that moment I didn't think anything bad would happen. I thought he'd have a few drinks and come home. I thought tomorrow was guaranteed. She touched the photograph gently. That's the trap, isn't it? We all assume tomorrow is guaranteed, that there will be time to fix things, to say what needs saying, to be better than we were yesterday. And then suddenly there's no tomorrow. And all you have left is the weight of what you should have done differently. The hours passed slowly. Ivy told him stories about Thomas, about their childhood, about the man he'd been before that night ended everything. She spoke about Sarah's talent with fabric, how she could take scraps and turn them into something beautiful. She talked about Michael's mind, how he'd solve problems other children couldn't even understand. And with each story, Deke felt the weight grow heavier, the reality of what had been lost become more concrete. These weren't abstract victims. They were real people with dreams and talents and futures that should have unfolded but never would. Dawn was still hours away, but Deke could feel something shifting in the darkness outside. Time moving forward despite everything, indifferent to their pain. There's something else I need to show you. Ivy reached into her coat and pulled out a final envelope, this one sealed and unmarked. I've been carrying this for 3 months. Haven't opened it. Haven't been able to. What is it? She turned it over in her hands. Her movements careful, almost reverent. After Michael died, I went through his things. Most of it I gave away. Clothes to families who needed them. Books to the school. But there was a box under his bed. Locked. I had to break it open. Inside was this. She held up the envelope. It's addressed to his father. Written the week before Thomas died. Michael never got to give it to him. Deke's throat tightened. What does it say? I don't know, like I said, I haven't opened it. Couldn't bring myself to. But I think you should read it. I think you need to see what Michael wanted to tell his father. What he never got the chance to say. She held it out to him. He took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was worn at the edges, handled repeatedly by a child who'd poured something important into its contents. Are you sure? She nodded. Someone should read it. Someone should know what words died unspoken because you chose silence that night. He broke the seal carefully, pulling out a single sheet of paper covered in that same careful handwriting he'd seen in the suicide note. But this was different. This was written by a boy who still had hope, who still believed in tomorrow. Dear Papa, I'm writing this because Miss Henderson said we should practice our letters, and also because there's things I want to tell you but don't know how to say out loud. I'm proud of you. I know you work hard at the depot and sometimes you come home tired and worried about money. But you always have time to take me to see the trains. You always answer my questions even when they're probably stupid. You always make Mama laugh even when she's had a hard day. Deke continued reading, each word cutting deeper. I heard you and Mama talking about sending me to a real school, the kind in the city where they teach mathematics and science proper. I want you to know I'll work really hard if I get to go. I'll make you proud. I'll learn everything they can teach me and then I'll come back and help you. Maybe I can work with trains too. Maybe we can work together when I'm grown. That would be the best thing in the world. The letter went on, filled with a child's dreams and plans and absolute faith in his father's love. Michael wrote about wanting to build things, to understand how machines worked, to make his parents proud. He wrote about a girl at school he thought was pretty but was too shy to talk to. He wrote about hoping to have a little brother or sister someday. He wrote about the future as if it was certain, as if nothing could possibly go wrong. At the bottom of the page, Michael had drawn a picture. 2 stick figures standing next to a train, one tall and one small, both smiling. Underneath, in careful letters, "Me and Papa when I grow up." Deke couldn't read anymore. His vision blurred, and this time he didn't try to stop the tears that fell. This was what had been stolen. Not just 3 lives, but all the moments that should have followed. Michael growing up, going to school, falling in love, building things, working alongside his father. Sarah creating beauty with her hands. Thomas watching his son become a man. All of it erased because Deke had valued his own safety over a stranger's life. I can't breathe. The words came out choked. I can't do this. Ivy's voice was cold again. Now you understand. Now you know what it feels like to see a future that will never exist. To know that somewhere in the world that could have been, Michael is alive. He's grown. He's building things. He's making his father proud. But in this world, the real world, he's dead. They're all dead. And you helped kill them. He wanted to argue, to defend himself. But the evidence was overwhelming. The letter in his hands, the photograph on the counter, the toy horse, the scratches on the walls. Everything pointed to the same truth. His cowardice had consequences that rippled outward, destroying not just lives but possibilities. You want to know something? Ivy's voice was quieter now, almost gentle. I didn't bring you here just to punish you. I brought you here because I needed to see if you could feel it, if you were capable of understanding what you'd done. Because if you couldn't, if you just shrugged it off and walked away unchanged, then I was going to kill you. Her words were matter of fact, not threatening, but simply stating reality. I have a gun in my coat. I've been carrying it for 8 months. Every time I came to this station, I told myself that if you showed up and felt nothing, if you tried to minimize or excuse what you did, I would end you. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. Because someone who can destroy a family and feel nothing is too dangerous to leave alive. Deke's hand moved instinctively toward his knife, but Ivy shook her head. Don't. I'm not going to shoot you. You passed the test. You felt it. You understood. You're carrying the weight now like I knew you would. That's worse than death. That's what I wanted. For you to live with this knowledge for the rest of your life, to never have another moment of peace, to see their faces every time you close your eyes. She pulled the gun from her coat, a small revolver, and set it on the counter between them. I don't need this anymore. You're already destroyed. I can see it in your eyes. Whatever person you were when you walked into this station, he's gone now. What's left is just someone who knows what he really is. A coward who let good people die. He looked at the gun, then at her, then at the letter still clutched in his hands. She was right. He was destroyed. The person he'd been, the careful distance he'd maintained from the world, the protective shell of indifference, all of it had been stripped away. What remained was raw and bleeding and aware of every terrible choice he'd ever made. The darkness outside was beginning to thin. Not quite dawn yet, but close. Soon the sun would rise and they'd have to decide what came next. Whether there was any path forward or if they'd both simply remain trapped here. Ghosts haunting a station that had claimed too many lives already. Ivy picked up Michael's letter, folding it carefully and placing it back in the envelope. This stays with me. I'll keep it safe. Keep all of it safe. Their memories, their stories, their dreams. Someone has to. Someone has to remember who they were and what they should have become. That's my burden, my purpose, the only thing I have left. And yours? Deke's voice was hoarse. What's my burden? She met his eyes, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw something other than anger or grief in her expression, something that might have been understanding, or perhaps just exhaustion. Your burden is simpler. You have to live. You have to wake up every day and make a choice, to be the person who walks away or the person who stays, to be the coward or the man who might someday, if he tries hard enough, do something that matters. You can't save Thomas or Sarah or Michael, but maybe if you're lucky, you can save someone else. And maybe that won't balance the scales, but it's all you have. It's all any of us have. The chance to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. The first light came slowly, touching the eastern horizon with pale gold. Deke stood on the platform where Thomas Quaid had last stood alive, where Ivy had watched her brother walk toward his death. The air was cold, sharp in his lungs, and for the first time in years he felt completely awake. Not the shallow alertness of survival, but something deeper. The awareness of someone who'd been forced to see himself clearly and found the reflection unbearable. Ivy stood beside him, the bundle of memories clutched to her chest. Neither spoke as the sun climbed higher, burning away the darkness that had held them both captive through the long night. I'm leaving now. Her voice was quiet, final. Where will you go? She shrugged, the gesture carrying exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. I don't know. Maybe back to Copper Ridge. Maybe somewhere new. It doesn't matter much anymore. I did what I came to do. The rest is just time passing. She looked at him directly. What about you? What will Deke Carver do now that he knows what he is? He'd been thinking about that question for hours. The easy answer would be to promise change, to vow he'd be better, to make grand declarations about redemption. But words were cheap. Words were what cowards used to feel better without actually being better. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small amount of money he had left, enough for a few weeks if he was careful. He held it out to her. This won't bring them back. It won't fix anything. But there's a family in the next territory, the Harpers. Their barn burned down last month. They lost everything. I heard about it 2 weeks ago and kept walking because it wasn't my problem. I'm going back there now. I'm going to help them rebuild, not for redemption, not to balance scales, just because it needs doing and I can do it. Ivy looked at the money, then at his face, searching for sincerity or self-serving performance. She must have found what she was looking for because she took the bills carefully. I'll make sure this gets to them. But money is easy, Deke. Staying is harder. Rebuilding is harder. Not walking away when things get difficult. That's the real test. He nodded. I know. That's why I'm going back. To prove to myself that I can stay. That I can be someone other than the man who walked away from Thomas Quaid. She studied him for a long moment. If you fail, if you run again, I'll know. And I'll find you. Not to punish you this time, but to remind you. To make sure you remember what running costs. Understood. The word came out firm. Certain. For the first time in his life, he meant it. They stood in silence as the sun continued its rise. The station that had been a tomb through the night now looked merely abandoned, its shadows retreating before the light. Ivy picked up the small wooden horse, the last piece of Michael she carried everywhere. She held it for a moment, then carefully placed it on the bench where she'd been sitting when Deke arrived. This stays here. This is where Thomas worked, where Michael came to watch trains, where I said goodbye to my brother. Let it stay. A marker for what was lost. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The 3 men who killed Thomas. They were sentenced last month. 2 will hang. The 3rd will spend the rest of his life in a cell. The law couldn't touch you because you broke no written statute. But we both know you were guilty of something worse than what they did. They acted. They chose evil. You chose nothing. And nothing is its own kind of evil. The words should have stung. But Deke felt only agreement. She was right. Action could be judged and punished. Inaction simply disappeared into the spaces between moments, invisible but no less destructive. I won't forget. His voice was steady. I'll carry Thomas, Sarah, and Michael with me. Their names, their faces, their dreams. And every time I'm tempted to walk away, to mind my own business, to value my comfort over someone else's need, I'll remember this night. I'll remember standing in this station and finally understanding what I am. She nodded once, accepting his words. Then she walked away without looking back, her figure growing smaller against the brightening landscape until she disappeared beyond the ridge. Deke watched until she was completely gone, then turned to look at the wooden horse sitting alone on the bench. A child's toy, a father's love, a family's destruction, all because good people failed when it mattered. He picked up his pack and started walking, not toward the next town where he could disappear into comfortable anonymity, but back the way he'd come, toward the Harper family and their burned barn, toward the hard work of staying instead of leaving. It wouldn't redeem him. Nothing would. But Ivy was right about one thing. He had to live with what he'd done, had to wake up every morning and choose whether to be the coward who walked away or someone who might, through sustained effort and painful growth, become worth the air he breathed. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the empty tracks. Deke Carver walked into that light, carrying the weight of 3 lives he'd failed to save, and the slim hope that somewhere ahead lay a chance to save someone else. Not for forgiveness, not for redemption, but because it was the only choice left that held any meaning. He'd been running for years. Now, finally, he was running toward something instead of away. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen, but it was a start. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, a start felt like it might be worth something. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another tale of hard choices and redemption in the unforgiving frontier, where courage and cowardice walk the same dusty roads. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you stories that challenge and move you. Your support means everything.